Hi there, and welcome to the Explaining History YouTube channel, and this is a short revision video for Year 7s on the Columbian Exchange. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about what the Columbian Exchange was and why it was so significant. The Columbian Exchange happened over a period of about 150 years, from the 15th to the 16th centuries. And it was an enormous interchange of plant and animal species between Europe and the two American continents, North and South America. The reason why it's called the Columbian Exchange is obviously related to the discoveries of the Americas by Christopher Columbus. Now, I call it the discovery of the Americas, but really it's not a discovery, because the Americas had already been discovered by their inhabitants, and the discovery, in inverted commas, is always referred to as a discovery, implying that there was nobody there in the first place, and obviously there were. Perhaps it would be better to think of Columbus's arrival in the Americas as an invasion or a conquest. Some might even go as far as to say it was the beginnings of a genocide, the complete and utter destruction of various native peoples of the Caribbean and of the South American and North American continents. One of the results of the conquest of the Americas was the Columbian Exchange itself. The European invaders brought back with them a number of foodstuffs and imported animals to the Americas. For example, the potato was one of the most important vegetables that was brought from the Americas to Europe. Before the 16th century, the potato hadn't been seen in Europe, and the potato was rarely eaten by European peasants. Initially, when it was first grown, it was believed wrongly that it might be poisonous, quite possibly. Some peasants ate the potato plant, which would have been poisonous to them. The Tudors gentry would not have eaten the potato as it had grown in the ground and was seen as an earthy food only worthy of the peasantry. Potatoes, because they grow so easily, and because they're such a versatile crop, and because they don't need rich soil to grow in, became very widely eaten across Europe, and they became very much the staple of poorer peasants, particularly in places like Ireland, where the Irish Catholic peasants in the 16th and 17th centuries were thrown off their land, which was occupied by Protestant planters, and they were forced to use more barren land, which one could grow potatoes in easily. Maize was another foodstuff that came from the Americas, and it was used widespread across Africa. The Columbian Exchange also affected Africa, because at this time European ships were sailing to Africa as well, and trading there, colonizing, and of course buying slaves. Tomatoes came to Europe from the Americas. Tomatoes were first entered Spain. They were very highly sought after throughout the Mediterranean, and they eventually become an important part of European cooking. Coffee is another foodstuff that comes from Africa originally, along with sugarcane, which comes from Southeast Asia, India, and these are taken along with slaves to the West Indies, where they are grown for profit in plantations and harvested by slaves. Foodstuffs like chilies originally come from South America. They don't really take off in Europe particularly. They're not hugely popular in Europe, but they are introduced by the Portuguese into India, where they are seen as a very important part of the cuisine. India didn't have chili as a foodstuff before the Columbian Exchange, and it certainly does afterwards. So what we can see is the Columbian Exchange doesn't just affect Europe, it affects wherever in the world Europeans are going. And it's Europeans who are at the heart of the Columbian Exchange. Europeans are the people who are moving around across the seas using trade, conquest and slavery to move around foodstuffs and livestock. Why is this happening? Why is this happening when it is happening? Why is this happening in the 15th and 16th centuries? Well, one possible explanation is because Europe was leaving the Middle Ages. Europeans were abandoning the old ways of surviving and living, i.e. feudalism. And if you're not sure about feudalism, look back through some of these videos and there'll be something on it there. And they were embracing trade and enterprise. They were finding new markets, and they were borrowing money from the banks of the European Renaissance, who demanded that they get interest on their loans. And so there was an incentive to make profit. And whenever there's an incentive to make profit by traders or merchants or bankers, there is what we call innovation, that new products and things for market have to be found or made in order to and taken to new markets. So people all the way around the world who will buy things you can find or steal will then add to your profits. So it is the beginnings of what we refer to as early modern capitalism. I'll talk more about what capitalism is in a later podcast, but capitalism really is the way of life that we understand and know now, where the creation of private wealth is seen as the basis of our society. And the very beginnings of this happen just gradually as Europe emerges from the Middle Ages. Fruit comes to the Americas as a result of the Columbian Exchange, some of it from Europe originally, some of it from Asia. The banana, for example, had never been grown in Central America or the Caribbean. It was originally an Asian foodstuff. The bananas travelled from Asia to Europe to the Americas. Oranges, for example, had never existed in North America, and they came from Europe. Many European industries develop because of the Columbian Exchange. Think about how much chocolate comes from Germany or Belgium or Switzerland or even Great Britain. Europe sent its animals to the Americas. Horses, donkeys, mules, pigs, cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, dogs, cats and bees came to the Americas because they were useful. The horse, for example, transformed how the Native Americans hunted and travelled. They had never seen such a creature before and found it incredibly useful. The cat has been responsible for, I think, the annihilation of large numbers of indigenous species on islands. They're terrifically skilled hunters and eaters of small mammals and birds, so not one of Europe's greater exports. The horses enabled Native Americans to become more nomadic and to hunt, particularly the bison, onto the Great Plains of America. And they could occupy larger territories, and often they would wage war with one another. So very often the introduction of European livestock came along with the introduction of European kinds of farming. The European colonists in North America particularly started to change the landscape. They started to make the landscape look like Europe. They started to create fields and hedgerows and to build roads and bridges and the kinds of things that one would see in Europe quite easily. The other thing that they brought with them was disease. In the transition from Europe to the Americas, diseases such as smallpox and influenza and measles came. These were diseases which were pretty unpleasant for Europeans to endure, but the peoples of North and South America had no immunity to them at all because they'd never been exposed to them. And the death toll in North and South America was equivalent to the death toll in Europe during the Black Death, for a very similar reason. The Black Death was borne by fleas on rats that came from Asia, and it was the plague was a disease that had not been experienced in Europe before, hence the reason why there was no immunity to it, and it killed such a large number of people so very quickly. And the enormous numbers of the Native American population died. It's thought that possibly 80 to 95% of the entire Native American population died in the first 2 centuries following the arrival of Columbus in America. Some parts of the Americas lost the entire population, and so there was a demographic, meaning the numbers of people, a demographic collapse across the Americas. And the other thing that was brought to the Americas via slavery was the disease yellow fever, which Europeans suffered higher death rates from than the slaves themselves, but obviously had a hugely damaging effect on Native American peoples. So the Columbian Exchange wasn't the first time in history that foodstuffs had travelled their way around the world because of trade and conquest. And it wasn't to be the last. We now live in a world that is in many ways based on the Columbian Exchange, where commodities are shipped around the world in large quantities to satisfy people who buy them from supermarkets. But the next time you're seeing a jar of coffee in Sainsbury's or a bar of chocolate in the Spa, it is based originally on the Columbian Exchange, which the Columbian Exchange wasn't a peaceful process. It involved a high degree of suffering and bloodshed and genocide in order to. And one of the byproducts really is this flourishing in world trade and this diversity and the cross exchange of animals, plants and human beings and diseases.